Good evening from London, good afternoon and good morning wherever you are. We hope you're all safe and well during these very challenging times. And thank you so much for joining us to celebrate the deep ocean in the first ever Deep Week. We're going to be taking a pretty pacey dive through the deep ocean and its importance to all of our lives. We're going to be hearing from artists, from scientists, from people who campaign to protect the largest biosphere on our planet. It is a difficult time for many of us, and sadly too many people still have their heads buried in the sand. Too many organisations are going under. But for us in the deep ocean, that can mean something slightly different. When our scientists have their heads buried in the sand, when our organisations are going under, it means we are busy working on the front lines. Over the next 90 minutes, we will work our way through the different levels of the ocean to full ocean depth, as we talk to people who spend their lives in, writing about, or protecting the depths of our planet. We'll start in the twilight zone, enter into the midnight zone, then the abyssal, and finally in the hadal zone. Later you're going to have the chance to ask our guests some questions, and you can see how to submit those questions on the screen now. But before we go any deeper, we should probably clear up one major thing: the deep sea. Scientists often refer to the deep sea as being beneath 200 metres, but the average depth of the ocean is of course over 4,000 metres. So of course the majority of our ocean, our planet's biosphere, where there is life on our planet, is in the deep sea. So we should really be talking about the ocean rather than just the deep ocean, as virtually all of it is deep. Right, off my high horse for now. We're going to now enter the twilight zone. And here's a short film to introduce you to some wonders of the deep.
The deep sea is the largest ecosystem on the planet. Like outer space, it's a vastly unexplored frontier. Bizarre and fascinating species live here. Many are like nothing else on the surface of the earth. A creature known as the feather star seems to dance through its watery home. Giant red jellyfish comb for food that's fallen from the world above. The Dumbo octopus glides through the water column. Ancient coral gardens stretch for many miles. Even at their great depth and distance from the rest of the world, this underwater empire is extremely fragile.
Welcome back. I'm delighted to now welcome Helen Scales, a marine biologist, broadcaster and a writer. Her work combines a scuba diver's devotion to exploring the ocean, a scientist's nerdy attention to details, a conservationist angst about the state of the planet, and a storyteller's fixation with words and ideas. Unfortunately for you, Helen, you are also my first guinea pig, because each person I'm chatting with, starting with you, I'm going to be asking 3 questions about different depths of the sea, and we'll see who knows the most. And you are all competing for the grand title of the deepest person on Earth. And as we're descending through the depths, let's imagine for a moment that we are with you in the twilight zone from depths of 200 metres down to 1,000 metres. So, question 1. 300 metres is the maximum depth of the Japanese spider crab. Helen, how big do they grow?
Ooh, Japanese spider crabs. Are they one of the ones that grow just enormously huge? So I'm picturing a picture of a gentleman holding one of these animals, and he's sort of got the body and it's about this big, and its legs are sort of almost touching the ground. So very, very big, maybe 6 foot long.
So claw tip to claw tip is 12 feet, is how big they can grow. Immense crabs. We'll see the biggest crab on Earth. Pretty good. Question 2. What is the depth of the deepest rescue from a manned submersible in history?
Oh, the deepest rescue from a manned submersible. Wow, okay. Well, we're talking about the twilight zone, so I'm assuming we can stay within 1,000 meters. So, I don't know, 850 meters.
Nah, 480 meters.
Oh,
So if you're in a sub and you're beneath that and you have a problem, then history will need to change if you're going to find a way out of there. Final question for you in this competition for the deepest person on Earth. What is the deepest known diving depth of a whale shark, which measures up to 12 meters and is the biggest fish on the planet? How deep does a whale shark go?
Wow, I wish you'd asked me sperm whale because I know that one. But whale shark, that's such a good question. I'm going to have to take a guess, I think. I'm going to go deep again, just because. I mean, last time I was wrong. I'm going to go 850 again, just for fun.
850. That's pretty close. I'll give you that one almost. Maybe 975 meters, 975 meters. They can go. They can dive deep. So well done. Thank you for participating in as our first guest and our first guinea pig on this great competition. But to you and your book, The Brilliant Abyss, which comes out next year. Sadly, there's no copies available yet, but lots of people are looking forward to reading it. I'm hoping you can give us a bit of a sneak peek and read a short extract from your book. Over to you.
I'd be thrilled to. Thank you very much. So this part I'm going to read you is from a chapter about hydrothermal vents. So I'm sure you all know about these things already, but these are these extraordinary ecosystems that are down in the dark deep that really live off the chemical power that comes gushing out of the sea floor. It cracks in the seabed, and these extraordinary ecosystems exist in places where we just didn't know about this till 40 years ago. So this is just a little introduction to some of the cool things that we found living on hydrothermal vents. Viewed through the portholes or cameras of a submersible, some hydrothermal vent chimneys appear at first to be covered in white rice. But on closer inspection, the grains are moving and twitching. Each one is a thumb-sized shrimp with a fan-shaped tail, like a little lobster. Scoop a gallon of seawater from around one of these vents, and it would contain around 11,000 shrimp. Other vents are covered in piles of snails with shining black shells and a distinctly un-snail-like foot sticking out, covered in overlapping scales like a suit of armour. Other snails cling together in long chains, perhaps mating with the next snail in the stack that hangs down like a living molluscan stalactite. Elsewhere, the view might resemble the hunched form of a giant napping monster with a coat of long, luxuriant fur. In fact, these are thickets of tube worms, their pink tips poking out of their tubes like artists' paintbrushes. Watch closely, and pairs of scale worms might be picking fights with each other. Each one is the size of a mouse, and what looks like 2 rows of large iridescent blue sequins fixed along their backs, and a shock of golden fur sticking out from underneath. Because of their sparkly costumes, some of these are known as Elvis worms. No one yet knows the cause of the glittering scale worms' conflict, but they bounce angrily on the spot for a while before throwing punches with their proboscis and biting chunks out of each other. In all, more than 700 species have been catalogued living around hydrothermal vents, including fish, octopuses, crabs, worms, starfish, anemones, around 8 out of 10 of which are endemic and live in no other habitat. And previously unknown species are frequently discovered, including puzzling new life forms. In 2015, at the Pescadero Basin vent in the Gulf of California, a mysterious animal was encountered that looks like a purple sock. Originally discovered 60 years ago, but never seen alive, experts were baffled as to what kind of animal this was. Genetic tests suggested it could be a mollusk, but in fact, traces of DNA have come from clams these sock animals ate, although how exactly is another unanswered mystery. The purple sock has no gut, no teeth, just a hollow bag. Tests from the 2015 specimen confirmed they belonged to their own very early branch of the animal tree of life. Scientists named it Xenoturbella, meaning strange turbulence. The sprawling mass of creatures living on vents can rival that of the same area on a tropical coral reef, except with a smaller selection of species and some prospering in immense abundance. Just like a coral reef, there can be so many animals they cover every available inch of space around a vent, sometimes piling up in multiple layers of animal life. And yet, video and photographs of vents with abundant animals filling the frame are somewhat deceptive. Exploring the deep, it's always important to wonder what's behind you. Pan the camera around, and just a few meters away, the vent ecosystems quickly taper out. Some vent chimneys are surrounded by areas of diffuse venting, where cooler fluids bubble through mounded domes of sediment and rubble. With temperatures in the tens rather than hundreds of degrees, animals have learnt to use these spots for the gentle warmth they offer in the otherwise frigid deep. Near the Galapagos Islands, scientists spotted a great pile of egg cases left close to a hydrothermal vent. They're thought to belong to deep water skates, flattened relatives of sharks, which use the warm water as an incubator to quicken gestation of their unhatched eggs.
Wonderful, Helen. Thank you so much. When are we expecting the book to come out?
So it comes out in the UK in February in 2021 and a little bit later in the US next year.
February. Thank you. Well, everyone must read that. Now, and there are so many questions which now have risen up from the beautiful prose that you have been writing there. Firstly, hydrothermal vents. They were first discovered, I understand, a little bit by accident in, was it 1977 on the Galapagos Rift or Ridge?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
What were they looking for and why was it an accident? How do you stumble across the first hydrothermal vents?
It was really the expedition in 77, the same year that Star Wars came out, big things were happening that year. They were geologists. It was a geological expedition. So they were really interested in what they'd found with these weird thermal anomalies, these sort of what seemed to be these sort of hot plumes coming up from deep down, from thousands of meters down, and they wanted to know what that was about. And at that point, it was thought to be linked to shifting of tectonic plates, and because this is all happening at where big oceanic plates are pulling apart, a new seafloor is being formed. So I guess the expedition was really aimed to understand more about those geological processes. And some scientists went down inside the deep diving submersible Alvin, and a geologist named Jack Corliss looked out the window and saw all of this life, these enormous mollusks, these mussels and clams, these tube worms. And I think he's quoted as saying something like, isn't the deep sea supposed to be a desert? But there's all these animals down here. And he's talking through a telephone to sort of transmits to the surface. And he just wasn't expecting to see any of this stuff down there. It must have just been an extraordinary thing to experience.
And it led to the discovery of chemosynthesis, because there's no light down there. Animals not photosynthesizing, but life around these hydrothermal vents is created through chemosynthesis. What is it to a layman like myself?
Chemosynthesis, so I talk about this in the book as well, this wonderful discovery. I call it the dark alternative to photosynthesis. So basically out here on land, every ecosystem, every animal, every living thing relies essentially on energy that's been harnessed from the sun through photosynthesis in plants and trees and grass and all the food we eat. But down in the deep, there is no sunlight, as you say. And so it was prior to that, it was assumed that the only food that got into the deep sea was stuff that fell down from the surface, dead animals, dead bits of plankton, marine snow that we call it. But here we were looking at a whole new system. And it took a couple of years after the discovery of these deep hydrothermal vents for chemosynthesis to be discovered. It was an idea that a few scientists had come up with, that maybe there were microbes that could harness energy from chemicals, which is basically what it is. That was your question. What is chemosynthesis? Instead of using energy from the sun, there are bacteria and microbes that use energy from chemicals. To split those chemicals apart, we're talking things like hydrogen sulfide and methane that bubbles up through the seabed in these vents. And they use that energy to make sugars. And then other animals will eat those bacteria. Some have them living inside their bodies. Those tube worms I was talking about have bacteria inside their bodies living symbiotically. They live in partnership, and that's where they get their energy from. So people had this idea before that maybe this could happen, but it was in vents that it was discovered that this form of energy production can support entire ecosystems. And it really, really revolutionized our view of what is possible in terms of life on Earth. It's completely revolutionary.
Incredible that it was only 40 years ago where we discovered a new form or source of energy, if you like. And you mentioned Star Wars back in '77, which was the same year when these hydrothermal vents were discovered. And we often look to space for inspiration, and yet the largest part of our planet where there is life is in the deep sea, and the deep ocean, the inner space and outer space, if you like. What can we learn from the exploration of outer space that can help inspire us to our journey into inner space?
There are all these connections, aren't there, between looking up and looking down, and I find that really fascinating. And I think there's a lot to go both ways, actually. And for starters, we use very similar sorts of technologies really to explore outer space in the deep sea. We send probes, we send unmanned missions to go and see what's there. I think really for me, it's almost more philosophical, really. This idea of, is there life elsewhere than on this planet? And as you say, the ocean, the deep ocean, is where most of life is. It's the biggest living space. 95% more than that is the deep sea of the living space we have on this planet. So is there life elsewhere? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But I think the fact that we've looked so hard already and not found any life anywhere else in the universe makes this planet so much more special, and the deep so much more important, that we really do need to know as much as we can possibly find out about what lives in the deep now, and also what was there before. I mean, the deep gives us clues as to how life began in the first place here on Earth, and maybe in the universe. We don't know yet. So I think it's that reflecting that big enormous space out there in the rest of the universe versus our huge space here, and just I think it just shows us how special it is, what we have here on Earth, and how we really, really need to learn as much as we can about this extraordinary space.
I mean, as we look up to the stars, it feels like it's an uplifting journey to a brighter future, as we can imagine what might be happening in the universe. But for a lot of people, philosophically, the ocean and the deep ocean is dark and scary. And it's a challenge to find inspiration and find ways to inspire people with the journey down as people are inspired by the journey up. How do we change that? I mean, how do we get people to realise just the value and the importance of the deep ocean? Maybe instead of starting to think about trying to inhabit other planets, it would be a lot easier to inhabit the ocean than it would be to get to Mars or anywhere else, presumably. So why isn't that caught on? And how do we inspire people a little bit more about the deep sea?
I think it is catching on, which is the exciting thing. I think people are really fascinated by the deep and what's down there, and opening that up in different ways, I think, is the thing. I guess there's two things we need to do with the deep, and we're doing it in new, brilliant ways all the time with the technologies we have to show what's down there and why it's important. And I guess that's it. So firstly, let's get eyes on the deep as much as we can. Let's get a view of what's down there. Because every time anyone goes to study anywhere in the deep sea, something new and unexpected comes into view, and then we have to wonder what that is and what's going on down there. And whether it's tiny microbes doing weird things with chemicals, or new extraordinary jelly life forms that we've never seen before, the beauty of the deep really is there to be seen. You just have to have the technology to put it to bring that back up for everyone else to see. So I think that's really important first, just to show that it is so full of extraordinary, beautiful and inspiring life forms and ecosystems. We just need to show that as much as possible, whether it's in words like me or pictures and films from scientists. And then the other thing, I guess, is weaving in those stories of just how important the deep is. And that's what we're learning as well. Besides the kind of wow factor of look at what's there, we're learning so much more about why it does matter. And going back to this analogy of space, with the outer space, it's big and it's out there and we can't go there, but we can kind of see it. We can look into the night sky and we can see the moon, we can see the stars, but you can't do that for the deep sea. It's so out of sight, basically everyone except ocean scientists. So it's so easy to forget, but the deep comes into all of our daily lives, in the air we breathe, in the climate. The balance of our living planet really depends on this huge space. for processing heat and nutrients and oxygen and carbon. All of those factors of we're learning more about how this whole thing works, and really how much we do rely on that hidden space, that hidden vast part of our planet. So I think it's those two things. It's the look what's there, and this is why it really matters that it's healthy and it's functioning, and that's the deep, really, those two things.
And looking at when you go down and explore the deep sea, this sub, or what you can see behind me, is the deepest diving submersible in the world. It's called the Limiting Factor, and it's been diving to the 5 deepest parts of the world's oceans. And your title of your book, Brilliant Abyss, almost suggests light, and that's one of the things which always startles me whenever I'm fortunate enough to go down a submersible into the deep sea. There is so much light in the deep sea, bioluminescence. The majority of animals in the deep sea are glowing. Why do they glow? What is bioluminescence? And in the darkness, why do they need light?
Well, I mean, imagine that if you lived in a world that was permanently dark or permanently twilight and dusky, it would be really handy to have your own source of light. And we've seen basically organisms and animals living in the deep have evolved the ability to make light time and time again. It's a very, very useful thing to be able to have, a flashlight, to be able to see through the dark. And that's what things like flashlight fish have. They have lights under their eyes which shine forward so they can see where they're going, basically find their food. Lights are useful for attracting a mate. In the enormous space, this vast, massive space we have in the deep sea, trying to find another type of animal like yourself in order to make more of yourself is quite a challenge. So having light to communicate and find another member of your own species is pretty useful as well. And then in this dark world, having light is incredibly good for startling those predators that are going to try and eat you, because that's another kind of constant factor in the deep, that it is quite hard to find food. Even we have got these chemosynthetic worlds and we've got food falling down in trickles from above. It's a pretty hungry place, so finding food is very important, and escaping becoming someone else's dinner is also pretty important. So if you have the ability to vomit glowing light into a predator's face, that's quite confusing, gives you time to escape. And so we see this time and again. We see lights being used as defensive strategies, as finding mates and finding food, that sort of thing. And it is just it's an extraordinary, I think it's testament to life on Earth, that if something, it makes sense, and if there's an adaptation to surviving in a difficult place, then it will happen, and it will happen again and again. And we see that in these amazing glowing creatures of the deep.
Helen, it's been a joy catching up with you and helping to bring the deep sea, the darkness of the deep sea, to light, and wish you every success with the book. And everyone should go out and order it ahead of time if you possibly can. Bump those numbers up on Amazon and other places. It's called The Brilliant Abyss. Helen Scales, thank you very much.
Thanks, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
And now we have a short film from the Pacific.
I have an organization known as the West Coast Development Foundation, which is a member of the Alliance of Saltwater Warriors, and we are established to fight or campaign against deep sea mining. Right in Papua New Guinea, in 2007, the provincial national government gave the mining company Nautilus Minerals the exploration license, and in 2011 the mining license. We have campaigned against this project since 2011 upwards, for the purpose that being our livelihood depends entirely on the sea. We depend on the fish, marine products for our daily survival. So, since 2011 till now, we have been campaigning against deep sea mining. There are several reasons for that, and one is this environmental impact. There's no one, right, even the scientists, the company, the government, knows the impact of the deep sea mining project. The second is the economical impact, right? We have fisheries that is a sustainable and renewable resource that will be affected by the seabed mining project. The third reason that we oppose seabed mining is because of our cultural connection with the sea. The project site, the Salwar 1 project site, is situated in one of our cultural area, that is the suckling culture. So we are afraid that once this project goes ahead, it might affect, it can have an impact on our cultural connection. So from our end, we say no to seabed mining.
Welcome back. We're now going to enter the midnight zone, my personal favourite of a zone, from 1,000 metres to 4,000 metres. Now, some of you may know, others may not, but the name of this depth of ocean, the midnight zone, was first popularised by the kids' cartoon The Octonauts, and it was subsequently referenced in the BBC Blue Planet series and now even appears in some scientific literature. So we have our Octonaut friends, Captain Barnacles, Quasi the Pirate, Professor Shellington and the Vegemals, all to thank for the Midnight Zone. To whet your appetite, here is a short film from Necton about our mission to the Midnight Zone that sadly had to be postponed due to the global health crisis. But the good news is, as soon as the situation allows, we will be returning and getting salty, and the mission will be going ahead.
The journey down, through sunlight into twilight, until there is no light. Temperatures drop, pressure builds, 1 atmosphere every 10 meters. Welcome to the Midnight Zone. Home to life. Life under pressure. Life that glows. Home to more different species than anywhere else in the ocean. Home to the peak of biodiversity. Home to up to 10 million species waiting to be discovered. It's a home of undersea mountains, tens of thousands of them, active volcanoes, far more than on land, hydrothermal vents, and subsea waterfalls. As our sun sets, this life ascends to feed. As the sun rises, they descend. This is the vertical migration, the largest migration on Earth. Every night, they draw carbon from the surface into the depths, into the Midnight Zone, into the largest carbon store on our planet. So, what do we know? We're sending scientists into the deep ocean to discover and to protect what's there. The Midnight Zone. It's darkest before the dawn.
I'm now joined by two people who have spent much of their lives rooted in the deep. Dr. Diva Amon, a deep sea biologist, and Professor Alex Rogers, the science director from RevOcean, and the only person I know who's had 3 different species named after him. A sea spider, a carnivorous sponge, I believe, and also a zombie snotworm. But before we find out why, let's go back to our quiz. 3 questions about the Midnight Zone. So, question 1. What was the depth of deep water horizon?
Are we just supposed to shout it out?
Yep. Do you know the answer?
Oh, let me say must be, was it about 1,600 meters?
I was going to say
Thereabouts?
1800.
Pretty good, Alex. You win. That's 1,522 meters. But the deepest oil rig, for an extra point, is 3,400 meters. Question 2. Okay, this is really going to test you. What is the depth of the Denmark Strait Cataract, which is 3 times the height of Angel Falls, the biggest waterfall on Earth, and it's also underwater. At peak flow, it's equivalent of almost 2,000 times the amount of water that flows over it than over Niagara Falls. But at what depth is it?
I don't even know what that is. So Alex, it's all yours.
Yeah, I have no idea. I'm going to guess 800 meters.
3,500 meters. Yeah, okay, final question. Come on, scientists. Question 3. At 3,675 meters, what is the deepest known shark? Come on, I'm going to have to hurry you. I'm going
to have a guess. Greenland shark?
Oh, it's not bad, not bad.
I'm
I'm
going to say Somniosa pacificus.
in English, please.
Is that the sixth gill? No, that's the shit. I don't actually know.
It is the Portuguese shark.
I don't even know.
So I feel, well, I'm glad I've brought some education to 2 of the world's leading deep sea biologists. Thank you for joining us. We will now move on to other people who know a little bit more about the deep. No, just kidding. Right, back to the key questions at hand. First of all, Alex, as we found out, you have species named after you. Diva actually named the zombie snotworm after you. So, Diva, why did you name a zombie snotworm after Alex? And more importantly, why are zombie snotworms so important for us?
Okay, so first question. So the zombie snotworm was found in the Antarctic during an expedition which Alex actually led. He was the chief scientist on, and they discovered the first Antarctic whale fall or whale skeleton sitting on the seafloor. And that was what formed most of the basis of my PhD. So I was super grateful to Alex for that. Why are snotworms amazing? Why aren't they amazing? They use a root structure like a plant to burrow down into whale bones and other mammal bones found in the deep sea. They basically find a way to live when other animals normally can't. And they have an incredible sex strategy, which just blows my mind every time. The worms you tend to see are the females, whereas the males tend to be tiny little specks, like dwarf males that you can have hundreds per female. And interestingly, the baby ostracs or zombie snotworms, they will basically choose their sex depending on what substrate they land on. So if a baby snotworm lands on a bone, a whale bone, it'll turn into a female. Whereas if it lands on a female snotworm, it'll turn into a male. And I mean, yeah, the deep sea, just astounding. Life is weird and amazing.
Incredible. Don't try that at home. Alex, to you now. So, the deep ocean, why should we care about it? I mean, what does the deep ocean really do for us? Particularly around oxygen, carbon cycling, the climate, food security. Why should we care?
Well, it's the biggest active store of carbon in the entire Earth system. Essentially, that carbon is stored for thousands of years when it ends up in the deep sea. Obviously, the ocean's absorbing about a third of the carbon dioxide emissions we produce. So without that function, we'd be in a much worse situation now in terms of climate change than we are. Also, the ocean absorbs vast amounts of the extra heat that are resulting from global warming, greenhouse effect of CO2 in the atmosphere. In fact, the ocean's absorbed about 93% of that additional heat. So we'd be a lot warmer now if it wasn't for the ocean as well.
And what does that heat do to the ocean, particularly the deep sea? I mean, what's the average temperature of the deep sea? Is what, 2, 3, 4 degrees or something? So what does this extra heat do to it?
Yeah, so we're now seeing warming of the ocean right down to many thousands of meters deep. And certainly in shallower water, those temperature rises have been quite significant. and have led to things like mass coral bleaching. So that temperature rise is destroying our coral reefs, the most diverse ecosystem in the ocean, as far as we know. But obviously also as that warming penetrates deeper and deeper into the ocean, it will also change deep sea communities of animals. And in fact, work that we've done off the northwest Atlantic, off the continental shelf of Canada, indicates that even tiny changes in temperature have a dramatic impact on the amount of life we see in deep sea sediments, in the mud of the deep ocean floor.
Is it fair to say that animals that live in the deep ocean are very sensitive to temperature changes? So are we looking to expect far greater impact on deep ocean organisms than perhaps we would see on land because of their sensitivities to temperature change?
Yeah, animals in the deep ocean are what we call stenothermal, and this means that they're adapted to live at a very, very narrow range of temperatures. Some of that is because some of these animals have actually evolved originally at the poles, so in Antarctica, in the Southern Ocean, and then they've invaded the deep ocean from those very frigid waters. So yes, they are very, very sensitive to changes in temperature, but also changes in food supply. So another effect of warming of the ocean is what we call increased stratification. And what this means is less mixing between the surface and deeper waters. And that affects the amount of food production at the surface. And of course, the animals in the deep ocean are dependent on that food falling through the water column into the deep sea for their sustenance. So reductions in primary production because of climate change will also affect the deep sea.
So are we, maybe it's a question for you, Diva, with the warming ocean and the different changes that the climate change is having on our sea, are we expected to see mass movement of biodiversity to try and deal with those temperature changes, for example, towards the poles?
Yeah, so forced migrations is one of the things that we anticipate is going to increase in frequency as our oceans warm up and as our deep oceans get warmer. But one of the things that we're really struggling with in regards to the deep ocean is that for a lot of it, we don't actually know what's there. And that means that baseline information, that crucial first layer of information you need with which to weigh changes against, we don't have. And so being able to see those forced migrations will be even more challenging because we don't have that original crucial data.
And Alex, you famously discovered, or your team rather, discovered a crab which you named the Hoff crab because of its similarities apparently to David Hasselhoff, which raises lots of questions about David Hasselhoff. But to Diva really on this one, actually, there's so much we don't know about the deep sea. I mean, how many species do you think are still waiting to be discovered? Do we have any idea, or is it finger in the wind still at this point?
Yeah, there've been a couple of papers that have come out about this, and it does tend to have a range. But I mean, I think the general consensus is that there are around 1 million species in the oceans, and about 250,000 of those have been discovered and are known. So that means there's still like 2/3 to 3/4 of all the species in the ocean still waiting to be discovered. And of course, a lot of that is going to be in the deep sea because of how little we've actually explored there.
And some of those species could be particularly useful to fight diseases, for example. Alex, maybe you could say a few things about what we've discovered in the deep sea, which has use and application for us on land, particularly around pharma at the moment, while we're still locked in this terrible global health crisis, and some of the first treatments for COVID are from animals in the deep sea. Is that right?
Well, yeah. Essentially, the deep sea is not just one homogeneous, billiard table of mud. It comprises a wide range of different types of habitat, underwater mountains, trenches, which go down to 11 kilometers in depth in the deepest part of the ocean, but also really extreme environments like deep sea hydrothermal vents. And these are hot springs where you get water up to 400 degrees C coming out from the sea floor. And life has been found to thrive around these vents. And that life lives off the chemicals that are actually in those vent fluids. So it's life without sunlight. So this is chemosynthesis instead of photosynthesis that drives the system. And from those environments, we found, not me personally, but scientists have found a variety of enzymes which are specially adapted to work at high temperatures. And one of those types or groups of enzymes, a group called Taq polymerases, are used in basically replicating DNA in many of the tests that are used for diseases like COVID. And because the enzymes from deep sea vents are particularly adapted to high temperatures, they have a very high fidelity in terms of replicating DNA. So they're very good for these types of tests.
Incredible. It's the bioactivity that we find in deep sea organisms, which is adapting to those conditions at the deep, including presumably pressure. You know, at every 10 meters we go down and we increase by an atmospheric pressure. How much does pressure have to play on the adaptability and the importance of deep sea organisms?
Absolutely, an enormous effect. It affects organisms right from their general metabolism all the way down to the processes which are going on in cells. So, for example, they have special adaptations of the cell membranes to keep them fluid under extreme pressure and also low temperature as well, because as you said, deep ocean is very cold. Their enzymes are adapted to maintain their shape under extreme pressure as well. So the animals are, you know, down in the midnight zone, they have to be adapted to a very low food supply. So they're adapted in that sense. Many of them have become smaller because of lack of food, but also there are these adaptations right down at the molecular level to allow them to live at those depths.
Thank you, Alex. And back to you, Diva. You, during quarantine and maybe ongoing quarantine, you ran a very popular series about the deep sea. Can you tell us a little bit more about that series and why you think it captivated people's imagination?
Yeah, so as lockdown started, I mean, it wasn't an easy time for anyone, I don't think. And I really saw it as an opportunity to provide people with some escapism and also to shine a light on the deep ocean, this little known part, but massive part of our planet. And it was just a social media post every day telling a story about the deep sea, whether it was a certain deep sea species or a place in the deep ocean or a function of the deep ocean. And yeah, people really loved it. And I think, you know, they really, people are just drawn to the deep ocean, whether it's that curiosity because it's so unknown, or because life is so fascinating there, or because it's so weird but also beautiful sometimes. And we see that happening with lots of other platforms, for instance, the Oceanus Explorer or the Nautilus or the Falcor that stream all their dives live. I mean, we see millions of people every year tuning into those feeds to engage and to see the deep ocean and to be part of that exploration. And I think it really is something that, you know, hits people quite deep inside. Deep, haha. But it really engages people and engrosses people almost. And it was just a chance to share things like, you know, the Dumbo octopus. You cannot get a cuter animal than that. It's just one of the most charismatic animals in the deep sea. And a lot of people just have no idea that exists. So great chance to tell that story. Or the anglerfish, how it finds a mate. I mean, there is no more bizarre tale in the deep ocean, in my opinion, than that. And I didn't grow up with the deep sea as part of my life. Growing up in the Caribbean, it just wasn't something I was aware of. And I want to change that for lots of other people, because it is such an incredible place And it is such an important place. And that was really the reason behind it.
Thank you, Diva, and please do follow Diva's
Instagram and Twitter.
Instagram and Twitter. There you go. And we can't leave without a plug for Alex as well. Wouldn't be fair. Highly recommend your book, Alex. You didn't ask me to do that, but I will. It is a fantastic book. The Hidden Wonders of Our Ocean and How We Can Protect Them. Alex Rogers, a highly recommended read. Thank you, Diva. Thank you, Alex. We could go on for hours, but unfortunately we can't. Thank you for your time, and we'll speak to you again soon, I hope.
Yeah, thanks very much, Oliver.
Thanks Alex.
Diva.
Thank you, Diva, and thank you, Alex. It was fantastic to hear from Diva about the Dumbo octopus that's recently been recorded down at 7,000 meters. Dumbo is also the star of the DSCC's new online game, Game Over, where you can help Dumbo defend her home against the threat of deep-sea mining. After you've played, you can also take action by calling on your Prime Minister, President or Head of State and asking them to defend the deep. We'd now like to welcome you to the next part of our journey, down into the abyssal zone. Welcome back again, and welcome to the abyssal zone, from 4,000 meters down to 6,000 meters. Now this is your chance to see how you can shape up in our quiz about the deep. First question for you is a general question, but how many mountains or seamounts above 1,000 meters are there in the deep ocean? The answer is, well, we don't really know. It's probably around about 100,000, or at least 100,000, but remarkably only a few hundred of these seamounts have ever been biologically sampled. Question 2 and question 3 are going to be wrapped into one. The Malloy Deep is the deepest part of the Arctic Ocean, but how deep is it, and what is the temperature down there? Well, I'm not going to give you enough time to Google the answer. And the answer is 5,500 meters is the deepest part of the Arctic Ocean. At -2 degrees is the temperature down there. So let's move on. So we have heard about how amazing, remote and fragile the deep ocean is, but it does not escape the destructive capabilities of you and I, of humankind, from plastic particles to warming, fishing, and now the threat of mining. This is Matt Gianni from the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition to tell us more.
Arguably, the single biggest threat to the whole ocean is climate change, climate breakdown, and that is also impacting the deep ocean, primarily through warming and ocean acidification. There are also more direct threats in the form of plastic pollution, which is found in the deepest ocean trenches, chemical pollutants, and destructive fishing practices. In terms of fishing, the deep ocean is plagued by a highly destructive practice, which is called deep sea bottom trawling, which drags heavy steel plates and heavy fishing gear across the seabed, destroying cold water corals, deep sea sponges, and other habitat forming species that support the biodiversity, much of the biodiversity in the deep sea. This practice is used to catch highly vulnerable fish in the deep ocean, such as orange roughy, which live at 1,000 meters depth and can live up to 200 years old, as well as round-nosed grenadiers in the Northeast Atlantic, which are listed as endangered by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature because of overexploitation from fisheries. Moreover, these fisheries often target seamounts, underwater mountains which are biodiversity hotspots in the ocean where the fish often congregate. Another direct and imminent threat is posed by the emerging industry of deep sea bed mining. This is an industry which, if allowed, will seriously harm an environment that we barely know much about and which could potentially drive species to extinction even before we know that they exist. This activity, currently in the exploration phase, will involve strip mining areas of the deep sea so vast they will dwarf any mining activity seen on land, and with equal, if not greater, destruction. The mining companies themselves and the states pursuing this activity are attracted by the potential for huge profits. But to justify what they plan to do, they argue that the world needs the cobalt, the nickel, the manganese, and the other metals that would be mined in the deep ocean for the technology industry and for the renewable energy industries. But this simply is not true. The threat of deep sea bed mining is imminent, with the move to turn exploration into exploitation likely to occur within the next several years in the international waters of the ocean. A regulatory body called the International Seabed Authority was established under the Law of the Sea Convention to manage mining in the international areas of the deep ocean. They are preparing the rules and regulations that would allow mining to begin. At the UN Biodiversity Summit, we heard many world leaders commit to actions to halt the loss of biodiversity on the planet, recognizing we're in a biodiversity crisis as well as a climate crisis, and we need to take action now. Yet, if the countries that are members of the ISA, and there are 167 of them, the same that are at the United Nations, decide to open the deep sea to mining, they will be opening a whole new frontier of biodiversity loss in our oceans. We need to hold our leaders accountable to the pledges they have made to all of us. For this reason, the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition is calling for a moratorium on deep sea bed mining. We're calling on the nations of the world to put a halt to the process of opening up the ocean to deep sea bed mining. We don't want it, we don't need it, and it isn't worth the risk given what we know now about what the impacts are likely to be.
Join us in saying no to deep sea mining. We don't need it, we don't want it. What we do need, what we do want, is a healthy ocean. We need to protect the ocean as if our lives depend on it, because they do.
That was Matt Gianni, co-founder of the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, and Her Deepness, Sylvia Earle. And with us live to discuss the threats Matt has outlined, we have special guests from organisations who are members of the coalition. Jessica Battle of WWF. We have Pepper Howard of Fauna and Flora International, Monica Verbeek of Seas at Risk, Vasa Sadel of the Oxygen Project, and Tamara Thomas of Conservation International. Thank you all very much for joining us. So first question, Matt has outlined some serious challenges to the deep ocean. What measures are in place to tackle these? First up, Jessica, can you tackle that one?
Yes, thank you, Oliver. Yes, so there's a patchwork of regulations that governments have agreed to on the ocean. Some of them do also cover the deep sea, but they only cover some areas and some activities. So, for example, bottom fisheries are covered in some areas, but they are very poorly implemented. And so there's lots left to do before we can open, if we wanted to open another frontier, but also even before then to regulate these activities to prevent more loss of biodiversity.
Thank you, Jessica. One of the things Sylvia said was that we don't want it, we don't need it. So this one's for you, Pippa. Why is it that we don't want it? Why don't we need to be mining in the deep sea?
Thanks, Ollie. Yes, we really don't want something that will destroy immense parts of the oceans, of the planet's life support system. In FFI's recent assessment, the risks posed are far-reaching, complex, and often irreversible, and tend to be immitigable, certainly within our lifespans, which makes them completely unacceptable. Now, marine ecosystems are as diverse and dynamic as terrestrial ones, but they're far more expansive and they're interconnected, which means that impacts can't be isolated, and what happens in one place has consequences in others. The deep sea is vast, and as we've heard, it has extraordinary rich biodiversity and really fascinating physical and biological systems that underpin the health and function of our oceans. For example, making and cycling nutrients that are really important to our fisheries and massively important in regulating our climate, as Matt pointed out. Now, deep sea mining will cause destruction of life, however small or large, as well as the loss of habitat, fragmentation of ecosystems, The sediment plumes from the actual mining processes will cause smothering of habitat and species and will interfere with how deep sea creatures can feed and breed and simply defend themselves from predators. So life takes some extraordinary forms, and many creatures have amazing life histories, but the deep sea mining will likely upset the chemical energy supplies that we heard about earlier, the chemosynthesis that fuels so many of these life forms. And importantly, how do you think these creatures that have evolved in these dark, quiet depths of our oceans will contend with the light and noise and electromagnetic disturbances of these large mining monster machines? Now, we know that these sorts of impacts have devastating effects on whales and fish and small plankton in parts of the ocean that we actually know pretty well. And it changes their behavior and actually has physiological effects too, and in many cases kills them. So, we've evolved, the ocean has evolved life over billions of years, and millions and millions of years have been taken to make these polymetallic nodules, for example, molecule by molecule by microbes, and they maintain that sort of life-enabling balance in our oceans. So what we don't see much of in the media is how much and how important the minerals and metals in the oceans are to basic life forms. And you and I all, and all that amazing biodiversity literally cannot survive without these minerals. So I don't mean part that is used to make our widgets and phones and computers and things. So no, Ollie, we don't want deep sea mining.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for that very powerful summary, I think, of why we don't need it. But one of the questions lots of people ask is, well, don't we need the minerals? There's lots of minerals on land, but there's also a huge amount in the sea. Well, that's what some believe. So I'd like to bring Monica in on this one, if I may. Monica, why do you think we don't need the minerals that are on the seabed?
Well, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it is that we are currently lost balance with the natural world, and that we need to take care of our planet to sustain us. So we shouldn't start making things even worse. We should really find other ways to supply ourselves with what we need. And there are good alternatives to the metals that we want to find in the deep sea. We should start at least to reuse what we have already extracted from our land. For example, there's really an enormous amount of metals going to waste. For example, even in Europe alone, each year, 150 million mobile phones just disappear in drawers, left there, rather than being brought to recycling facilities or being reused. So there's already a huge step you can take just reusing these metals. But you can go further. You can, for example, look at our mobility systems, because we do not need to replace the 1 billion cars that we have with electric cars. I mean, then we would still be sitting in traffic jams, right? So what we want to do, and what Milan and Paris are already aiming to do, is that in cities, you reduce tremendously your car use. For example, they want to make it a 15-minute city, so where you can just cycle or walk to whatever you need. And there's really cities that aim to ban private car use completely. So you can decimate urban car fleets, for example, that will also save an immense amount of metals that you would be needing. But you probably should still take further steps. And to counter also the ongoing climate and nature collapse, we really need new forms of economy that focus on the well-being of people and the planet, rather than the eternal GDP growth as we have now. I think that is the future that we want and that we need. And deep sea mining has no place in that and is not needed.
Thank you. I mean, I'm hearing very clearly that it is going beyond just about the protection of species and the habitats of the deep. There's many other reasons why we don't need them and why we don't want to be engaging in deep sea mining. But I'd like to bring Vasa in, if I may now. Vasa, looking at the role that the ocean plays in its contribution to the ecosystem services that it provides to our planet, what are some of those, and how will deep sea mining affect and impact some of those critical functions of the deep ocean?
Yeah, Ollie, Deep seabed mining will absolutely affect our ecosystem services that the ocean provides. And if you haven't already figured it out from Matt Gianni or Dr. Sylvia Earle or from my other amazing panelists, a healthy deep sea is fundamental to a healthy ocean and a healthy planet. We actually rely on the ocean for the majority of the production of our oxygen. So just think every other breath you take, you can thank the ocean for. And we also know that the ocean is really the reason, or a large reason, why we don't have runaway climate change today. It's sequestered the majority of our carbon and is constantly absorbing the planet's rising heat. And sadly, as a result, as Matt Gianni was saying, we're already seeing symptoms of the ocean's health decline. And deep seabed mining is just another major stressor to the ocean. And it's really a threat to climate change at a time when simply we just can't afford it. So yes, Ollie, a healthy ocean makes the earth habitable. And when we mess with that, we do so at our own knowledge and at our own risk.
Thank you, Vasa. I mean, looking at that point you made about the heat that the ocean has absorbed, I hear it's something like 93% of the heat has actually been absorbed into the ocean. And if the ocean hadn't acted as that buffer, then the atmosphere on our planet would already be over 30 degrees Celsius hotter. And that report, I think, came out with the IUCN relatively recently, a couple of years ago. Stunning. But Tamara, we haven't heard from you yet. I'd love to bring you into this conversation as well. We've heard before as well about how really unknown the ocean is, and there are so many, because it's so unknown, there are so many risks that we can't understand about the type of impact that we may be having on the ocean. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is extremely true, and CI Conservation International has recently completed a survey of coral reefs in deep sea ocean on the high seas and found extraordinary ranges of coral habitat supporting countless, often endemic species. Currently, CI, we have just released an article on this in the Frontiers in Marine Science. And this study reveals that many things. First, I already said that there is a lot that has not been discovered. And also current scientific understanding points toward adverse and long-lasting impacts should deep sea mining be permitted. Habitats and environmental quality of the oceans will likely be degraded, particularly for sensitive species like deep sea corals, and all the other associated species that depend on coral reefs, including, of course, humans. So certainly, the science does not know everything that currently exists, and even though we are exploring and watching out for what is there and what can be destroyed, there's a lot that still remains to be discovered.
Thank you, Tamara, and Monica, Vasa, Pippa and Jessica. And now it's your turn, our audience, wherever you are in the world, to actually ask some questions. We've had quite a lot of different questions coming in. So what we're going to try and do is pull some of those questions together, and then I'll filter them and throw them back at our esteemed panel of experts here. So first one that's come in is around the high seas. We've had many questions on this, the area of the ocean which falls beyond the jurisdiction of countries and which makes up about half of our planet. Most of the high seas is deep ocean. So the question is, will the new treaty that's being negotiated at the United Nations, will that treaty give the deep ocean the protection it needs? Jessica, one for you there.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. Yeah, so this treaty that's being negotiated at the UN, it's been going on now for a few years. It could do so if there was enough ambition instilled into it by governments. But the risk we're running is that it will create a framework for protected areas, but it will not be able to regulate all the industries and activities on the ocean. And so it will help in bringing together the patchwork of regulations and rules out there. But we still need to, first of all, make sure that there are good fishing rules and good rules for other activities, but also to prevent destructive industries such as seabed mining with or without this treaty.
Thank you. A second cluster of questions coming in around, can we stop mining itself from going ahead? There are industries in some countries that are hell-bent on starting it. The commercial viability of deep sea mining is getting ever closer. The licensing is moving from the International Seabed Authority are looking to start to move the licensing away from just exploration into exploitation licenses. So the question is, can we actually stop deep sea mining from going ahead? Pippa, one for you then.
Well, at the moment, that's the very big question, and a lot of us are trying very hard to both raise the awareness around these issues, as we hear today. But there is a motion being posed at the IUCN World Conservation Congress, and that is to essentially put a lot more thought, a lot more science, a lot more thinking, to call for a moratorium, calling to the international community to actually put a halt on this. But yes, I mean, the big question is, why the hurry? What is the end point? And why chase something where as we've all said, it's either not needed or the risks are too high.
Mm-hmm. And if people are watching back home, is there something which they can do to stop it if they're compelled to do something? What should and what could people do at home?
Well, there are various petitions that could be called, which would help our governments make decisions and help to represent the arguments at the International Seabed Authority, but also bringing in a broader community and collective action to help support a moratorium. I think Monica wanted to add something too.
Monica, yeah.
If I may, no, I just wanted to basically reinforce what Pippa just said. I think somebody already explained that the high seas, the deep sea, is a common heritage of mankind. So it's from all of us. So we all have a say about this, and we should talk about it. And you heard Matt say that there have been many leaders calling for a moratorium. I think that we should all now call our leaders, wherever country you are, and tell them, look, we are in a planetary emergency. We have a climate collapse. We have a biodiversity collapse. The last thing we want you to do is to go and destroy even more biodiversity. So we want you to join the rest of all these leaders and also call for a moratorium. Mm-hmm. So because it's our sea and it's our planet, and we don't want you to destroy it.
Thank you. I mean, the high seas are the last great collective commons. There are a few places, Antarctica, for example, and a few other areas which are known as the common heritage of all humankind. The last vestiges of that is our high seas, but that represents half of our planet, and it belongs to you and I, belongs to everybody here watching it. If you want to have a voice in this conversation about what happens to half of your planet, and how some industries, some nations want to carve it up for their own purpose and their own profits, then make your voices heard. And there'll be more coming on how you'll be able to get involved in that in a moment. So another group of questions that are coming in. Is there something we can do to protect the ocean through the climate treaty itself? Lots of discussions around the climate treaty at the moment. So is there some vehicle within that climate treaty which we can utilise to help protect the ocean? One for you, Vasa.
I would say, simply put, deep sea conservation has to be part of the climate treaty. If rainforests and other biodiversity is going to be part of the climate treaty, then the deep sea, which is the largest ecosystem on the planet, as everyone knows, because they've probably heard it so many times during this amazing event, but you haven't heard it enough yet because it's probably the first time you've heard it. And it also plays, as I was talking about earlier, this important role in the carbon and oxygen cycles. And beyond that, the ocean is also an amazing solution for climate change. So really, if it's not in the climate treaty already, it has to be put in the climate treaty, because not only is it the actual ecosystems that are preventing us from having runaway climate change now, it also includes a lot of the solutions that can get us to our climate targets. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, I think maybe someone else can speak specifically towards the UN climate treaty on exactly where and that could be implemented. But if we're going to have a adequate and comprehensive climate treaty at the UN, it has to include deep sea conservation and protection.
Thank you, Vasa. So another question that's coming in is around the species in the ocean and endemism. How high is endemism around individual hydrothermal vents? And one of the things I find astonishing, which is I heard from one of our panelists earlier, Professor Alex Rogers, when he told me actually that the peak of biodiversity is not in the surface waters. That's where we have the greatest amount of marine organisms and marine animals in those shallow surface waters. But as we descend deeper, our biodiversity actually starts to increase before the amount of food actually then results in biodiversity then decreasing. So we have this zone called the bathyal zone from about peaks around 1,000 to 3,000 meters, where we have the peak of biodiversity in our ocean. So when we look at the hydrothermal vents, do we know what level of endemism there is around these hydrothermal vents? Maybe one for Pippa.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. I mean, they're absolutely fascinating, and they're very rare, actually, hydrothermal vents. They're found along the mid-ocean ridges where the tectonic plates are splitting and the Earth is birthing. But actually, there are only about 50 square kilometers of hydrothermal vents across the entire planet, and that's about 0.0001, 4 noughts and a 1% of the ocean surface. But they're very, very remote, very distributed, and because there's such unusual conditions, we've heard there's very high temperatures, quite toxic chemicals in the ocean, that the life that it's adapted to those vents is incredibly unique. And because of the distance between each vent, you get this isolation, which helps, evolutionary processes to, sort of go off on their own streams. So you do get these islands of endemism, which means that there's particularly only creatures that are found at particular vents. There's actually a snail, which is now, under a red list species, a snail called I think it's a scaly foot snail or a pangolin snail, is found on only one hydrothermal vent. So, if that was taken up by seabed mining, it would cause the extinction of an entire species. So, that's the level of endemism that we get. And of course, they're extraordinarily unusual creatures that live in these areas.
Thank you, Pippa. So I'm getting the sense that these hydrothermal vents, like undersea Galapagoses, and they are rare, and they haven't been biologically sampled, many of them. So if mining went down and took them out and destroyed them, we'd be looking at the destruction of undersea Galapagoses, which are previously undiscovered. So we just won't know what we've destroyed or what has been destroyed. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. And I mean, each of those species is dependent on the other. And you get these little ecosystems that are unique to those hydrothermal vents. Some species may move between vents, but the likelihood, it's a bit like us having a sort of hot shot for the stars. You're sort of aiming in a direction and hoping that you land on something good. But yeah, so they're extraordinarily unique and precious. We need to protect them.
Thank you. Right, who hasn't had a question for a while? Tamara, this one's coming for you, I think. So the importance of the ocean in your life, and is there, tell us about the importance of the ocean in your life. And I'm going to throw a curveball in there as well, because we've been grouping two questions into one. This is, should we mine the moon instead of the deep ocean? So would you like to move to the moon and do some mining there, or why is the ocean, how has it informed your life and your passions?
So I would say about the moon, I think we should respect all living organisms, and if mining is going to take place there, maybe we need to consult. And also look at the science. But honestly speaking, I could just, address one other thing, sort of following up on what Pippa was saying, but focusing more on the deep sea corals. I just wanted to note that, they represent by far the largest portion of our planet, and it's home to the greatest diversity of species and ecosystems on Earth. Also, deep sea reefs currently enjoy extremely stable conditions because they are highly vulnerable to any physical disturbance at all. Including whatever will come from deep sea mining. It's really important to just take that into consideration. That, species at these depths are extremely slow growing and they're very long lived. So it would take thousands or millions of years for these environments to even recover from any sort of mining impacts. and we just simply don't have these similar ecosystems. So in response to the ocean, what does the ocean mean to me in my life? I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, just like Diva. The ocean, I think, has really influenced quite a few Caribbean women and people. And I grew up really loving the leatherback turtles, and I always wanted to make sure that I did whatever I could to preserve the ocean and the life in it.
Thank you. What a wonderful answer. And I think a question coming in here about one of the things which Matt outlined before about the problems around fisheries. What measures can be taken to deal with some of those fishery problems that Matt outlined? One for Monica. Monica, would you like to tackle that one?
Oh, well, I think if we would finally stop subsidizing fuel or giving fuel tax exemptions, so indirect subsidies, I think most of the deep sea fishing, especially the trawling, would stop immediately. It can only exist because it's being subsidized. Because imagine you have to trawl really, really huge distances to get there. And then to trawl deep, that's an enormous amount of fuel that takes. And that can only be done because fuel is too cheap. So it's ridiculous. I think if we would only stop that, that would already help tremendously. And then if there would be also a bit of a better check on illegal fishing, that would also help quite a lot. So I think it's not easy. That's not what I mean. Otherwise it would have been done. But it's very, it's relatively simple solutions that we can take to have a good look at this deep sea fisheries and realize that actually it's not really needed and it wouldn't be there if we wouldn't be subsidizing it.
Thank you. I think, Jessica, do you have your hand up there? Would you like to contribute something there?
Yeah, so I can contribute something to that, but I actually wanted to contribute more to the mining of the moon question, because I found that intriguing, if I may.
Please.
Mining the moon's coming up every now and then as an alternative to seabed mining, but seabed mining is coming up as an alternative to terrestrial mining. And it's not, first of all, there is nothing saying that if the seabed is being opened to mining, that terrestrial mining will cease. And so I think that's a very important thing to take into consideration, that we actually, by possibly opening up a new frontier, doesn't mean that another frontier closes. So I don't think that moon mining with, can you imagine the fuel it would cost to take you to the moon, first of all? It would be totally preposterous to do. But also seabed mining is equally preposterous due to the same reason. And we should really look after our own house. And we should, as Monica said earlier, we should learn to live with less.
Yes, no, very true. I mean, there's people, we all, there's one of the conversations we had earlier, and what we can learn from space exploration, which can be brought into ocean exploration. And there is a sense that we do look up to the stars for inspiration. And there's a very strong narrative around how we need to be, or some people are saying, we need to find another planet in which we can live on. But I find that's a pretty challenging, a slightly questionable position to take, when it would be a hell of a lot easier to inhabit the ocean than it would to inhabit Mars, and probably a hell of a lot more interesting as well from what I've seen of Mars and what I've seen of the ocean.
If I may, it's also a bit sad if you already give up on our planet and decide to go elsewhere, isn't it? I think we just have to accept that there are some limits, that metals are not renewables, and that we just have to adjust the way we use unrenewable resources.
I completely agree. So we've got a few more questions. We've only got a couple more. We've got another 10 minutes left. So whilst we can, I'm going to take this moment to return to the deep sea quiz, if I may. I know many of you have enjoyed this. Many of you may not have done, but this is a popular thing. Well, something I'm very keen on anyway. So we're going to continue. So we've now reached the Hadal zone. So we obviously need to conclude there. From 6,000 meters to full ocean depth, which is 10,925 meters, I understand. So live from my spare room, my top end studio where I am now, I'm going to bring in a very special guest who is going to ask us a question. Her name is Marina, named after the Marianas Trench, of course, the deepest part of the ocean, and she is now going to join us with her big question for the quiz, wearing her beautiful shark pajamas, because it's very late and you should be in bed.
My question is, what is the deepest living fish?
Deepest living fish. That's a good, thank you, Marina. Thank you very much. She stayed up all for a very long time just to be able to answer that question. So who's going to tackle that one? Anyone know the deepest recorded fish? Marina does. So I will give you the answer. The answer is the ethereal snailfish that was found at 8,145 meters by a scientist by the name of Dr. Alan Jameson, the brilliant Dr. Jameson, who is at the University of Newcastle, and he found that I think down at the Marianas Trench. I'm sure he'll tell us where he found that relatively soon. So the ethereal snailfish. Anyway, you'll be probably relieved to know that is now the end of our quiz. We'll give you the winner in a moment, who is the 2020 Deepest Person of the Year. I'll give it to you now. In fact, the answer is, quite surprisingly, there only one person, which was Alex Rogers, came close with one answer. But all the questions I've asked about the deep sea, not many people have known the answers to any of them. So really what that tells me is no one really knows much about the ocean at all, even some of the world's leading experts on the subject. So that was revealing. And in fact, the deepest person of the year I will give to Marina, because you are actually named after the deepest part of the ocean. So, and she knew the answer to that one because she asked it. So, right, back to our questions. We've covered the moon. I think we can leave that one and put that one to bed for a moment. So, whale fall. How about this? How important is whale fall to deep ocean life? Anyone's going to put their hands up and answer that one? Pippa.
Yeah, whale fall's extraordinary. It's like a sort of giant smorgasbord just arrived at the bottom. It's just when whales die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean. And you can imagine there's this sort of feeding bonanza. And in an area where food is very scarce, and a lot of creatures are very tiny and they rely on chemosynthesis and a primary production from all sorts of unusual processes. But whale fall is just, it's like a feast. So often attracts masses of numbers of creatures that come and feed off that. So it's a good opportunity if you're at the bottom of the ocean to actually see the type of diversity of carnivores when they all come to try and feed off these whales that just provide lots of food.
Thank you. We had Professor Alex Rogers, who had a zombie snotworm named after him by one of the other guests on board, and I think they are some of those animals which burrow into the bones. Is that right?
They're extraordinary cases as well. I think they've found ancient sort of fossilized whale bones, which have actually been turned into metals. The polymetallic nodules that are found at the bottom of the ocean. That's what the miners are looking for. Wow. So that whole sort of the bones have turned into these fossil forms of metals, and it's just extraordinary. So, and they're tens of millions of years old, obviously.
Extraordinary. So another question coming in. Given the size of the ocean, monitoring illegal activity, mining and fishing is extremely difficult. How do you think that this can be combated? Anyone want to take that one? Monica, thank you.
Well, I'll give a first shot, and perhaps Jessica can back me up here a little bit. But at least for fishing, if the ships would put their tracking devices on, then of course you can really track them and trace them down, and you know exactly what they're doing and when they're doing and where they're doing it. So that would be a big help. And I also suspect, I mean, I've never seen it, nor any one of us, I hope. But I suspect that if there would be some deep sea mining going on, that it would be noticeable, because you at least should have a big vessel above there. And I could imagine, I'm making this up, but I could imagine that the plumes that they are making, the mud streams, that you must be able to see them from space. I'm not sure. I would think so, and that might give them away, perhaps.
Yes, I mean, then there are some good satellite technologies which are used for illegal fishing and also mining on land and other nefarious activities which go on, which are happening on land. There's a very good use of satellite technologies for enforcement of illegal logging and as well. So that maybe the plumes could give them away. A question here about our governments. Deep ocean mining is targeting an area of the ocean that we know so little about, and we've heard quite a lot from marine scientists about the destructive effects of deep sea mining. So, are our governments really listening to us? The UK government, for example, has partnered with Lockheed Martin, I understand, in their licensing for deep sea mining. So does anyone want to take that? Are our governments listening to us? And if not, what can we do about it?
I can maybe give it a start.
Yes, thank you, Jessica.
There are governments who are listening. The Prime Minister of Fiji, for example, has just enacted legislation for a moratorium in Fijian waters because he cannot do that for international waters on his own.
Mm-hmm.
There are also other heads of states and prime minister who have done the same. Several in the Pacific. The Portuguese Minister of the Sea came out the other day saying that he wanted to see a moratorium on seabed mining. He's not yet supported by his government, but that's a pretty good start. However, I think one of the problems we have with governments is that they are segmented in such a way that you have a Minister of Environment, you have a Minister of Fishery, you have a Minister of Industry, which probably is the ministry which would deal with mining.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't always talk terribly much. I mean, I've been in meetings where, coming from WWF, we want to talk to the government about an issue, and it's the first time the government agencies come together themselves to talk about this issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're doing some headway, we're making some headway, but there's much more that needs to be done. And getting the public to also voice these concerns would also help governments to listen.
Thank you very much. I think we've probably got time for one more question, but we're going to have to wrap it up, I'm afraid. And so this one is, how can we get more young people engaged in this particular issue? There's lots of issues, lots of which are out there in the world, lots of young people getting more and more involved in different issues around climate change, around the impacts of industry and other nefarious actions which are going on around the world. How do we get more young people involved in this one? Anyone want to pick that one up? Vasa, not that you're a representative of the young people, but I'm going to throw this one at you because we haven't heard from you for a while. Vasa, over to you.
Absolutely. So deep seabed mining is an issue that the youth generation and future generations that aren't even here yet should care about the most, because it really deals with our future. And it, as you said earlier, it deals with over half of the Earth's surface. So really what we're confronted with, what Jessica was saying, is an awareness issue. Right now, there's the science, and FFI has done an amazing report on that. And so many other groups have done amazing science and amazing reports on the threats of deep seabed mining. But right now, it's our challenge to get this information out to the public and specifically to the young generations, because these are the people who, even though we're inundated with so many issues right now, this is really the subset of the population that is going to really care about deep seabed mining and will want to do something about it. So what we do at the Oxygen Project is we use social media to disseminate this information. And I see it all over social media. Deep sea conservation is there as well as FFI and WWF. And so the more we can create a chatter around deep sea science and the deep sea and deep sea conservation, the greater success I think this movement will have in getting our politicians and our countries to say, we don't need it, we don't want it, it isn't worth the risk.
Thank you, Vasa. I think that's a great way to wrap up this evening. Yeah, this is in many ways a very serious and challenging awareness issue, and the high seas are the last great collective commons. Under the UN law of the sea, it belongs to you and I, the people of the planet. If we want to affect the outcome of what happens to our high seas and what happens on our seabed and all the life and all the ecosystem services, those critical functions of the ocean that give us life on this planet, it's up to you and I all to have our voice heard and give our politicians the public mandate that they need to act on our behalf and tell them what it is which we want. So thank you to our guests and to all of you for joining us and for your questions as well. Thank you for your time, for your attention and for your passion of the deep sea. We hope that you have enjoyed this program, and we'll celebrate Deep Week on social media with the hashtag Deep Trouble. If you would like to know more about the DSCC or its members and partners, you can visit savethehighseas.org. And you can also support the campaign to protect the deep ocean from mining by visiting the Game Over pages on the website. Well, that's it from me, and I'm going to leave you with just one final thought. Go deep. Good night, good afternoon, and good morning.